Hello, everybody, and welcome to another OSINT Curious live stream. I'm Micah Hoffman, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by my partner in crime, Stephen Harris. Hey, welcome, Stephen.
Hi, it's good to be here again. It's been way too long.
It has. And our wonderful guest bloggers and amazing OSINT people. We've got Alexander. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You are welcome. And Vanessa, Intel Inquirer. Welcome to the OSINT Curious Project show.
Thank you.
Now, for those of you that are just learning about us, just saw the alert message on LinkedIn or your favorite social media platform that we were going live, just wanted to introduce ourselves real quick. We are the OSINT Curious Project, and our goal is to share open source intelligence information, tips, tools, techniques with the community at large. Scrolling along the bottom of the screen is our website, social media handle, how you can support us financially through our Patreon patron site, and also the Discord that Alexander actually helps us run. So you can talk with him more on that. But we're here today for a different reason. This is not one of our normal live streams. This is a special live stream where we're going to talk with Alexander and Vanessa about their blog post that they wrote for OSINT Curious, and it's on Strava. Can you tell us, one of you tell us what is Strava?
Do you want to go ahead, Vanessa?
Sure. Yeah, Strava is basically it's basically a social media platform where you can log your activities and exercise, primarily walking, running, and cycling.
And why would people care about this for open source intelligence? I mean, why do I care where a person's exercising or walking or their dog or running? What does that matter?
Yeah, that's basically what the blog's about, learning what you can find in it and how you can extract information from that platform. And you'll find it's quite useful for various different reasons.
All right, well, let's get into that blog. You see on the screen there right now is the link to the blog. I will toss that into the chat as well. For those of you on Twitch and YouTube, you can just grab it from the chat. If you go to our OSINT Curious webpage, it's on the homepage there, and you can just click on You Can Run, but you can't hide. All right, Vanessa, why don't you take us through the first part of the blog and explain what it's about?
Sure. So basically, as I said earlier, it's an exercise kind of app. There's currently 50 million people using the app and over 4 billion activities logged. So there's quite a substantial amount of data that is available on the site. I think as well with COVID-19, with the lockdowns, with the restrictions, a lot of people have cancelled their gym memberships and are starting to exercise from home. So I think looking at Strava and seeing what kind of activities you can find can be really helpful. So basically, to log into the site, there's 4 different methods. There's logging in through Google or Apple or Facebook or your email. So if you're doing OSINT investigations, I recommend using a fake account, which is also known as a sock puppet, or a fake email address, basically. It's important to note as well that it's dependent on the privacy settings of your POI. So if they've set everything to private, you won't be able to extract a lot of information. But it's good to note as well that when you do sign in, it's automatically set to public. So someone actually needs to change those settings manually in order for it to be private.
So there's a huge amount of data that is considered to be social media. It is mostly open by default, right? It's public by default. And this is data about where people are and what they're doing. I can't see how somebody would be interested in this for OSINT. This sounds like a gold mine.
Yeah, it's quite fantastic.
Can I just jump in? So one thing is the fact that it says a lot about where people are when they are there, but it also, I mean, the platform also holds a lot of biometric data. A lot of, you can see what someone's heart rate was at a certain time. You can see how many breaks they took. You can see the elevation they had when they were running or cycling. So one thing is, it says a lot about, behavioral patterns or exercise patterns, but it also says a lot about a person's health. Like, are they, fit? Are they overweight? Are they, regular exercises, or is it something they've just recently taken up?
Yeah.
It really is health
Which
data.
is also in sort of the public sphere, being one of the platforms that have public as default.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it shows also the amount of time it took for that particular exercise. So if they're doing the same thing day in, day out, you can see with time that they are improving as well.
I've been working with Strava data since 2015 or so. Some people might remember a talk I gave back then. And one of the things that I really liked was aggregating that data about people. I know the next part of your blog is about people searching. It's about how do you search for an athlete and what they're doing. Vanessa, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, to search for an individual, you can search with their first and last name. So it's unlike other platforms like Instagram and Snapchat where they have a username. It's primarily just their first and last name. And if you do search for a name, it will come up with similar names if there's no names for that particular first and last name. But yeah, it shows you a profile image based on their privacy settings again. And that can also be useful in a number of ways. For example, a lot of people use the same profile image across platforms, so that could be a way to identify an individual. Or as well, for example, if someone has made their exercise activities private, but for example, their profile image might have an image of them wearing a cycling helmet, that still gives you an indication of what kind of exercise they may be doing. And you can delve deeper into those kind of searches. So as you can see in this image here, that's an example of the exercise that can be done. So it showcases where they've started their exercise, where they finished their exercise, and what time they started it, how long it took. They can name their exercise activity as well, like here, morning ride, afternoon ride. So that can provide a lot of insight. If you look into that image, you can see that they've been exercising at roughly the same time each morning and each afternoon. And that's quite useful because you can establish a kind of routine of what that individual is doing.
You get the patterns of life, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if there is like a human intelligence aspect of your investigation, that could be something of use, having that routine and knowing of it.
There was a really neat case in the UK where criminals were going on Strava, watching people post their really expensive bicycles, leaving from their house on a ride, and then logging that. And then they'd come home and they're like, hey, my bike was stolen while I was at work. How did they even know I had a bicycle at this location? It's like, well, Strava's kind of open there, isn't it?
It's quite common for people to start exercise from their residential address as well. So that's something that you can find on this platform.
And Strava, it does allow you to block a radius or make private area within the radius of your home address. But I saw a couple of years ago now someone who realized that the shape it makes is a circle.
Yes.
So because it's a perfect circle with your house in the middle, you just look at all their runs and all their rides in different directions, and you can plot the circumference of the circle, and you can figure out the house is in the middle. So you have to be really smart when you set your privacy zone so they don't censor.
I saw that too. I was like, wow, look at these privacy settings. Look, it anonymizes my last. Oh, no, it doesn't anonymize it. It just gives my last initial. Oh, look, it blocks where my house is. No, look, if I just draw a plus in that circle, that's where my house is. Huh? Oh, it blocks my city, but every single ride or walk has the location where I was. So I'm not sure that these privacy settings were that private. Did you all find this too, that the privacy settings were not as sufficient as you might like?
Yeah, you have to be really smart with them. That's it. I noticed really recently that they've sort of put some of their features behind a paywall, like the leaderboard and things like that. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah.
The
Is that for the pro athletes?
yeah,
Or-
even for the non-pro athletes like myself, you have to.
Come on, Stephen. For the
Yeah.
UK, you're like considered a pro athlete.
Not quite, but because obviously the idea of Strava is you compete with people even though you're not riding the same time as them, right? So you have leaderboards for different segments that you race on or cycle on.
Well, that brings up the next part here, Stephen. Great segue into the segment search. Who's going to talk about that, Alexander, or is it Vanessa?
I can talk about that. So there are two functions in Strava regarding segments, and they are to some extent quite similar. It's segment search and segment explore. The segment search will give you a different overview of the different routes. So a segment on Strava is essentially just a pre-made route by the users. So you can generate a route in the city you are, in the case of the blog post, on the army base that you are, and then users can compete among themselves on these segments.
So you actually can tie who was at a certain location at a certain time.
Yeah. So if I create a segment called the OSINT Curious segment, and then everybody who does that segment or completes it will show up on the segment leaderboard, which essentially just shows like how long did it take for Stephen to complete the lap, or how long did it take for Micah, Vanessa, or myself to do it. And you get data on at what time did people complete the lap, or who completed it the fastest, or when was the latest instance of someone completing the lap, which in the case I used in the blog post was something I used in an investigation I did when I was working for a Danish newspaper, where we were sort of doing an overview of cyber hygiene in the Danish armed forces, which turned out to be not good, to say the least. So yeah.
Yeah, well, one other thing. So there's obviously the avenue of open source intelligence when you're looking at a person. When we're doing people OSINT, we want to know where people are, what they're doing, patterns of life, like Vanessa was talking about. But I was hearing about another use for this. One of my OSINT colleagues was telling me that they had a crime that was committed in a certain place. They went to Strava, looked for a run segment, and then they were able to look back and see who was there possibly at the time when that crime happened. So we can get witnesses or other people in that area, which is actually a pretty neat way of using the data.
Yeah, well, we've actually linked, I think there was an article about it on Aware Online. We've linked that in the additional resources in the blog. And they mentioned how you can create even like a fake run from one place to another. So say you know that there is a crime that occurred somewhere, you can do that and then see who ran there at a particular point in time. Yeah, so it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I think at that point, it's different because, like, at a certain point, you're now querying that data, right? You're not just searching for what's already been posted, but you're interacting with that database and pulling out really interested aggregated information. Very cool. All right. So let's get back to it. So here we talked about the NATO force, which is what you were talking about, Alexander, right?
Exactly.
The sprint to GD room.
Yeah, so I mean, Strava is kind of a wonderful platform in the sense that you can get the same data in a lot of different ways, which is something I personally really like, because it means that I have to look over the same data again and again, which means that when I verify it, I've seen the data like 1,000 times. So you can go about it in different ways. Like the segment search, is a great way of seeing who was there at a specific time, and that data can then be corroborated by looking at the different people you're looking into on their individual profiles, because the laps that show up in the segment search will also show up in the personal profiles.
Right. And I think you mentioned in the beginning of the article that for a lot of this activity, while much of it's public,
Mm,
logging in with the sock puppet is important. I think Vanessa, you brought that up, right? So to get access to the most amount of data, the most detailed data,
mm.
logging in with the sock puppet account is probably important. Cool. So we've got inner fence line here, which yeah, leaderboards like you were talking about, and then
Mm.
other resources. Now, you did this research over the course of how long? How long did it take you to actually get it done?
I mean, I based my sort of portion of the blog post on sort of existing data or existing research that I've already completed. But the sort of examples I used were from that story I did a while back, a couple of years ago. And that took about a day to sort of aggregate that data. I honed in on a specific officer to illustrate the point to readers. Um, but I mean, you could essentially do that with an entire, you know, platoon in a month probably,
Yeah.
and then log everybody's activity. It's incredibly accessible, and I think that this, like we've mentioned it a couple of times, but the public by default is something that people don't consider that often unless they, you know, have a vested interest in privacy.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally know a lot of people who use Strava just for themselves. Like that's what they say when I ask them about, you know, like, do you know how much information I can find about it? And they're like, no, it doesn't really concern anybody. It's just for me. And some people are even, you know, surprised that I have access to that data because they think it's private because it's
Yep.
just, you know, them and their smartwatch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good because if they sign in like in 2015, for example, and they forget about changing their privacy settings or don't think about it, you have access from 2015, all the activity they've done till now. So it's quite a lot of data that you can access. It's not like it's only restricted to the last month. Since they've started using the platform, you've got access to that data if it's public.
Yeah. I had so I've been using Strava for examples of how an open social media platform that has health data could be analyzed in some of my courses. And one of the things to kind of put a point on the conversation here, one of the things that we're able to do is look at a location, find a person that ran on a run segment or multiple people, then pivot to their profiles, look at what other places they've run or biked at, and using those just simple techniques of pivoting within the platform without even going to their Facebooks or their Twitters or other places, you can see in the one case that I was looking at for over 9 years worth of runs where this person that did personnel security was, and you could see him stationed in Iraq and then stationed in Afghanistan and then stationed in, and you could literally map out their troop movements. Like I think you mentioned Bellingcat shows as well. So yeah, it's interesting.
I,
So go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point because it's I mean, it's one of those platforms where you can um, just find the right way to phrase it. You can both use the data you get in sort of a looking back kind of way. Like you can see where someone was at a specific time,
Yeah.
like your security contractor type. You can map out like his movements around the world, but you can also use the data in order to prepare something. Like let's say you're doing a pen test and you want to find like which security guard is the least likely to catch you if you run away from him. Like
Yeah.
you can find out by looking at the data. Like, is he a fast runner? Is he a slow runner?
That's interesting. And which
Or is
shift
it
is
more
he running? Is he,
No,
yeah.
I think my main point is I think you're right. You can get a lot of data out of Strava alone, but it's I would always say like any platform you look at it in conjunction with other things. Like don't just rely on data from one thing. So in this case, like in the story I did a couple of years back, I was getting data from Strava and then finding this person's home address, which was like he'd gone to great length to conceal his home address and his fact, like he wasn't on Facebook, he wasn't on LinkedIn, he wasn't anywhere, but just pivoting from Strava and then going to court documents, housing documents, then I was able to sort of ascertain where he lived. Yeah.
Vanessa, you were going to say something.
Oh, yeah. So just in terms of finding their friends, if you struggle to find them on a social media, you can look at their followers and following on Strava, and you might be able to find them that way. Or as well, just knowing the kind of physical activity that they're doing in their spare time. You can search for example, marathon runs within their community, or other exercise groups that you might find them in, and just use whatever data you have and try and extend that and see what else you can find online.
Yeah, and there's another aspect to this too. I mean, if you think, so the Strava data is really person-centric, right? It's I go for a run, I go for a bicycle ride. So we obviously can see where a person is at what time. And in fact, if you're a geek like me and you look in the source code of any one of these activity pages, you'll see something called JSON, where it tells you at every interval what is the latitude and longitude where this person was at this time. It's absolutely incredible. But we can also look at the data in a different way. And I think, Alexander, you were hitting on this a little bit. We can look at a facility, we can look at a place and find out what's happening from there. Are people, riding their bicycles to and from, and it ends up, that their morning commutes terminate at that building. Well, then that person might be an employee over there. When I did my work back in 2015, I downloaded 800,000 of these Strava activities, and I analyzed them. And one of the things I found was that there was at least one security company over in the UK that was making their security guards use Strava as they walked their patrol around different facilities. Yeah, so you could look and see, oh, the Tilbury Power substation, this is actually where the guards walked, because if you look at it with the heat map on, that's where it shows they are. So it's neat to be able to understand what's happening at a certain location.
Definitely.
Steven, you're back.
Hey,
what are your thoughts on this? Have you ever used exercise data? Now, we're talking about exercise data in general. We're talking about Strava just as a point of interest here. But Steven, in your police work that you can speak about, and your consulting that you can speak about, have you ever used exercise data to further a case?
Not for a case, but where I have used it. I'll give you two examples. One's really good, but it's kind of more digital forensic data. And this was a murder case, actually, where this guy had murdered his wife, and he denied being at the scene of the crime when it happened. He'd said, I was a mile away, I was ordering food somewhere. But when he was arrested, they got all his tracking data off his watch that he used for that. And then it's just a load of GPS coordinates, with timestamps. And you put that on a spreadsheet and load that into Google Earth or another similar platform, and you could show exactly where he was at the time. So that was some colleagues of mine were involved in that. My favorite Strava moment is in one of the things I used to do in the police was around personal security and cyber hygiene. And about 5 years ago, I got invited to give a talk to a load of people who worked in the intelligence services. At a location not too far from where I worked at the time, and they said, "Oh, because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so everyone has to come to this seminar," which is quite boring if you're not into that stuff, right? I don't think it is, but some people there's Cybersecurity Awareness Month.
Not me,
So
but other people. Yeah,
I did pretty much exactly what you guys showed in your blog, which was we looked at their location where they were based, and there was a running track there, and you could see every lunchtime the athletes in the organization, they went out and they ran laps around the track and they competed against each other and so on. But because this was a closed military or semi-military base, you knew everyone who ran around that track must work there. And then, of course, that's your starting point. And I pivoted from there. So here's the guy who's at the top of your leaderboard. He was from the US. Obviously, I was in the UK, but he was in the US, so he stood out a bit more with his name. Then you looked at the research he worked on when he was at university, which was published, so you knew his area of expertise. you find his wife's name, you found his Facebook profile, found that he was a runner, and I plotted this all out. I started with Strava as my first slide, and the next slide was like, this is where you live, this is where you run, this is your fastest marathon time, this is your wife's address, this is the data breach you're in, this is what you do for a living. So I know I've read your research that you published. I know what your area of expertise in technology is. And all this room of people who were not interested in cybersecurity up until that point, it was like you could have heard a pin drop, and they all began to turn on the guy who I'd randomly chosen as, there you go, exercise is bad for you.
Exactly. That's why I don't exercise.
That was a take. But it was a serious point, because these are people who should have very, very good operational security, and just starting with Strava, pointing at where they are and going from there, you get loads of lines of inquiry.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like if a POI, if you know they like exercise, Strava could be your first point before the other social media platforms. I wanted to touch on as well, I previously worked in a role in insurance fraud. So if someone...
In catching people that had done insurance fraud, not in frauding. Okay.
Yeah. So if someone stated that, they had a bad back and they couldn't do a lot of exercise, and they're on Strava cycling every day, we can use that as well. So that's another field that it could be used in.
So let me ask you this, Vanessa, Alexander, we always talk here on OSINT Curious about how the opposite of OSINT is really privacy, right? The more private somebody is, the harder it is to actually find things publicly about them. Now, I'm not asking you I will ask you, how would you, if you were using Strava, because many of our listeners might use Strava, what steps might you do to limit this type of exposure within Strava if you were a user? Can you think of anything?
First things first, go to privacy settings.
Okay.
Yeah,
so enable all the privacy settings that are possible, all right?
Yeah. That includes things like profile image as well. So there's a lot of things that you can make private.
Because it's a social media platform, the profile picture, we can do reverse image search on that. One of the things that I've found is not using your real name. If like you started out saying, Vanessa, we can search for a person's name. You could even do a Google search with a site strava.com and then Micah Hoffman in quotes, and you will find any public thing. So don't use your real name if you do use Strava. Have you all checked into any of the other exercise apps out there to see if you can do similar things, or not yet?
No, I don't exercise that much.
I just watch people online do it. Yeah.
I'm not on any of the platforms, but no, I haven't looked into them. But okay. I mean, I would be surprised if you couldn't do similar things on whatever apps there exist out there. I'd be very
Okay. Yeah, there are other apps as like Ride with GPS and Run with GPS and Map My Run and some like Garmin have their own proprietary ones, but I don't think any have quite got the social aspect as well embedded as Strava have. So that Strava seems to be the main one.
That was really that was something I found, again, this is years ago. I was looking to see if, I could update my reference point, but back then, whether it was Fitbit or Nike or the Map My Run, Ride, Walk, many of them really focused on the exercise instead of the social. What I found with Strava is that they always emphasize social over the exercise, over the kind of security part of it. So if you go to Fitbit, there's a lot of privacy settings. It was very granular and they were good settings. If you enabled them all, it was really hard to find information about you. Whereas in Strava, I never really saw that.
I mean, I think to be fair to Strava, that you do have a lot of control over what you do show on Strava, and you can keep certain. Like if I took a run or a bike ride, you can make that specific activity private as well, and you can do sort of a similar thing to LinkedIn where you show your first name, but you only have like a one-letter last name.
Yeah.
But as well,
Micah H. in the Washington D.C. area. There's not many of us.
Yeah, I
Good.
agree. In fact, it's like a social media platform. Like you can even upload photos with your friends during your ride or exercise, and you can comment on it. So there's just another element of the social media aspect of Strava.
And we didn't even really touch the heat map, right? On the how people were using that to track military bases and other things, finding these hot spots in the desert where there are no roads, but there are people running or biking in certain patterns that look like roads. So um, really interesting thing. And I don't know about you two, but when I started digging into Strava, it was really just interesting to see all those the things that we've been talking about, the pivot points in the data. You know, we could go to a person. We now have geolocation data. We have location data about a facility. I really loved that about it. So cool.
Exactly.
I don't know if how often you will use Strava, but I disabled it on mine, so I can't view it. I've had a Strava account maybe 10, 11 years now, but they used to have a
We know.
flybys feature. And when you were out running or cycling, if someone who was also a Strava user went past you at the same time, when you both uploaded your stuff, you would see each other on the map. You would say, and it would show you the point at which you passed, and say, "Hey, that was Micah Hoffman, and this was Stephen Harris." And so when I cycled to work every day and uploaded my stuff to Strava, I could see the people who were cycling the opposite direction to me who also say, "Oh," and then it tries to make those little associations between. It's fun, but if you could see how, if you're so inclined, you could lose that for badness.
Create that. Go
It
ahead.
kind of sounds
Alexander.
like Bumble for athletes.
Yeah, pretty much.
Isn't that what it's called? The dating app? Bumble?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
find locals near you, singles near you. Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think one of the challenges here, you know, if you're thinking about privacy and all, is normal people are using the app because they want to exercise. And
Yeah.
don't get us wrong, please. If you are a person that likes exercise, exercise. The thing that you have to watch out for is who's protecting or not protecting your data, because if you have people that are exercising and I'm somebody that wants to find out all of the employees that work for a certain company, a certain location, it is trivial for me to create a fake GPS route, upload it to my sock puppet false account on Strava and say, oh, I just biked this. Let's see what other people just biked this or ran this at 9 a.m. or 8:55 a.m. so I can see when all the people are going to work. So there's absolute exposure here. I had a case that I worked one time. It was a high value target, a person that was like a CEO of a company, and they wanted to see their online exposure of them and their family. And I looked at their family, and sure enough, their daughter had a Strava account. And every day when she came home from school, just like you mentioned, Vanessa, there was a pattern of life. She walked the dog, and she said walking the dog, and she walked the exact same route every day at a certain time when she got home from school. And I said, this could be a problem if you're worried about, you know, physical assault, abduction, and other things. So yeah, it's something to be aware of. And I love the fact that you shared your knowledge with us and you shared the blog post. Thank you so much for doing that. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yep. And thank you, our listeners, our viewers. I know that some of you have been posting here in our chat. We appreciate you showing up for this live stream on Vanessa and Alexander's blog post on You Can Run, but You Can't Hide. It's now featured as the top post on the OSINT Curious Project's website. I'm Michael Hoffman. That is Stephen Harris. Yes. All right, and we're gonna get out of here. Yeah, sorry, Access OSINT, it is over. We've talked about everything. Hey, and Stacy's back. Yeah, normally we recognize the people that are there, and Adi, thank you, and Death Knight and Flibble, all our loyal viewers. Great. Thank you all for showing up, and thank you to Vanessa and Alexander and everybody. I hope you stay
Thank you
OSINT
for having
curious.
us.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you for coming.